Welcome to another episode of 40 Minutes in the Old Testament. 40 Minutes in the Old Testament is a 1517 podcast network podcast. So you can go to 1517.org/podcast and check out all the other podcasts that are living over there. And while you're over there, of course, check out everything else that 1517 is doing, all those academies, books. You ordered Chad's book on the Psalms yet? If you haven't done that, man, pause what you're doing. Go to the show notes. Click the link. Get that ordered. Then resume, of course, as we go through Isaiah. And where we're at in Isaiah is chapter 39. Hezekiah was real sick, and God said, I don't think you're going to make it. And so Hezekiah had to talk to Isaiah a little bit and had a prayer. Wasn't a great prayer, but God said, I'm gonna give you 15 more years. How about that? That's what I'm going to do. And then Hezekiah has a great kind of prayer, song, poem, whatever it is, in response to that. And then we got this, we ended with this weird little detail about how exactly it is that God would make Hezekiah better. Yeah, he had a boil issue. And so get some fig cake. Went to the store, grabbed a fig Newton, stuck those on those boils, and there you go. God working through means, and Hezekiah has recovered. And that is where we ended.
That's got to be one of the strangest details. Yeah. Next time I have a boil, I know I'm getting a fig cake.
Yeah, absolutely.
Going down to the Walmart bakery section. All right. So, I think I mentioned in the last episode that 38 and 39 are set up as a contrast of each other, because we're going to see two different sides of Hezekiah. So in chapter 38, we see the Hezekiah he's sick, and he prays to God. He sings a song of thanksgiving. And then in 39, we're going to see Hezekiah. He's recovered, and now he's going to mess up big time. He's going to invite some Babylonian ambassadors into his house, and he's just basically going to show them all his stuff. And then Isaiah has a word for him concerning what's going to happen to all his stuff. And then in one of the most disappointing responses in the Bible, we'll see what he says at the end. It's a pretty selfish statement on the part of Hezekiah. I think I'm just going to read the whole chapter, which sounds like a lot. It's 8 verses. This is a very, very short chapter. At that time, Merodach-Baladan, the son of Baladan, king of Babylon, sent envoys with letters. Don't forget that detail. Sent letters and a present to Hezekiah, because he had heard he was sick and had recovered. And Hezekiah welcomed them gladly. And he showed them his treasure house, the silver, the gold, the spices, the precious oil, his whole armory, all that was found in his storehouses. Must have given them quite the tour, right? In fact, there was nothing in his house or in all his realm that Hezekiah didn't show them. So that's what happens first. Isaiah, the prophet, came to King Hezekiah, and he's got a couple questions. He says, "What do these men say, and from where did they come to you?" Hezekiah said, "They come to me from a far country, from Babylon." One commentator said it's almost like he's kind of proud of himself. Yeah, these guys, they came from a long way just to see me, this far-off country. Isaiah responds, "What have they seen in your house?" And Hezekiah answered him, "They've seen all that's in my house. There's nothing in my storehouses that I didn't show them." And then we have finally Isaiah's response to Hezekiah. "Hear the word of the Lord of hosts. Behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house and that which your fathers have stored up till this day shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, says the Lord. And some of your own sons who will come from you, whom you will father, shall be taken away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon." Okay, Dan, just imagine. You've heard this, right? So what's your response going to be? Hezekiah said to Isaiah, "The word of the Lord that you have spoken is good," because he thought, there will be peace and security in my days. It's like,
I got to tell you,
that is awful.
Hezekiah does not come across in this 8 verses as like the brightest bulb. Okay. He comes across not just looking like, it's not that he comes across looking evil, even though that last sentence is kind of evil.
Yeah.
But he comes across just looking foolish.
Just kind of naive, right? Politically naive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and just because even when when Isaiah's like, "Oh, what all do they see?" Like he's not catching on. It doesn't seem it's just like, "Oh man, I mean that. What didn't they see?" I
Gave him
mean,
a grand tour.
yeah,
Yeah. All the rooms, all the storehouses.
yeah. That is wild. That you would do that, and yeah, and the fact that the way this, hey, they came from this far country, man. I gotta tell you, like you just seem gullible, man.
Very, very gullible. Yeah. We talked about this last time that this is kind of out of sequence, out of historical sequence. So this is before the Assyrians attack. This is before they, surround the city. They send their ambassadors, the Rabshakeh, and all of that. And the reason we know that is because after that happened, or while that was happening, well, Hezekiah had to empty out all the storehouse. He had to pay these guys off to begin with, and they still came and surrounded the city. So this is before this is happening. So historically, what seems to be going on is the Babylonians. We know that Merodach-Baladan, who's also known as Berodach-Baladan, his name could start with an M, could start with a B, same guy. He had a long history of rebelling against the Assyrians. So he's kind of a minor player on the world scene at this point. The Assyrians are still top dog, but he's been rebelling against them with some other tribes. So he's looking for an opportunity to gather around him some allies so that he can use them in his ongoing quest to basically knock the Assyrians off the pedestal and take their place, right? So what's he doing here? Well, he sent ambassadors to not just give a present to Hezekiah, kind of a glad you're better, here's some balloons, but with letters. That's why I pointed that out. And these letters, no doubt, based upon what Hezekiah did, these letters must have basically said, hey, I'm Merodach-Baladan, these are my guys, we would love to enter into negotiations with you so that we can team up against the Assyrian king. But we need to know that you're capable of, on your part, providing, some funds and some men and all that kind of stuff. So Hezekiah responds by saying, well, let me show you guys what I got. Look at this storehouse, look at this armory, look at all my realm. I've got all this going for me. In other words, what Hezekiah is doing is basically the opposite of what he did in chapter 38. In chapter 38, he did what was right. He turned to the Lord. He trusted in the word that God gave him through the prophet. He sang a song of praise. He's doing what God called all the kings of Israel to do, to trust in him, to lean upon him, and not to put their faith in some sort of political salvation. Now he's flipping, and he's doing the exact opposite here in chapter 39. And he's given a stern word. Well, all that stuff you showed these guys, well, they're going to take it in a couple of generations back to Babylon. And then he's got this response at the end. Well, hey, at least everything's going to be hunky-dory in my days. And it's going to be my grandsons who have to deal with the fruit of what I have done today.
Yeah, really, really deal with it. Like be eunuchs. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's rough.
Yes.
That's rough.
Super rough.
Yeah. This. I mean, this statement at the end is. I mean, Hezekiah is, we would say one of the better kings, but even the good kings, man, they have their moments. And maybe he just Hezekiah has looked down through history and doesn't believe that good kings are coming after him, or he's like, man, this thing is on a short timeline here. Yeah, man, maybe he's just relieved. Okay, well, I guess it's not going to happen on my watch, but it is definitely good. He might have already just been like, dude, there's no stop, because he kind of did get that. That is sort of God's word to the good kings is like, hey, thanks for trying, but it's a little too. It's it's too late.
Too late.
Yeah.
Yeah, Josiah will be, something similar will be said to Josiah too. Not about, his sons, but the fact that it's too late. It's great. You're doing good work. You're a good king, but look at all the history that's gone before you. And yeah, the people are, no matter what Josiah did, He's not going to change the hearts and minds of all the Israelites, no more than Hezekiah was going to do that. Just because you have a great king doesn't mean you have a great kingdom. It doesn't mean that all the people who are in the kingdom all of a sudden going to give up on their idolatry and quit frequenting the high places and begin trusting in God. That's a generational thing. You've got to have like 6 Josiahs or 6 Hezekiahs in a row if that's going to happen.
Well, it tells you
and
this.
You never had that.
It tells you this, which is a good thing for you to know. You just can't legislate faith.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
exactly right.
you can't sign it into law. You just can't. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
I mean, you can, but it's not. It doesn't work. You can demand that everyone be, all right, guys. Like from now on, like we don't believe in any of these false gods. Like we only have one God. Well, that's just not how it works, man. Like I mean, you can outlaw idolatry all you want, but that's not the same as faith.
Mm-mm. No, you can hang the 10 Commandments up wherever you want to. It's the same. And nothing wrong with commandments. Nothing wrong with the prohibition of worshiping false gods. But prohibitions aren't going to do anything than prohibit. They're not going to create anything. Yeah, and a lot of times they're just going to lead to further rebellion on the part of sinners. Yeah. So. That's short chapter 39, but that's all that's there. And that wraps up our little aside into some prose, into some historical prose. And we've talked about all of these things, or most of these things anyway, when we covered 1st and 2nd Kings. But there were some things that were new there, like the whole psalm or song of Hezekiah. That's not included in the King's literature. So there was some new material there. So if you think, man, that history is pretty fascinating. Well, if you haven't listened to 2nd Kings, well, here you go. There's your chance. Go back and jump in there. But as for us, well, we're going to jump right back into some poetry, beginning with Isaiah 40. And this is a major transition within the book of Isaiah. In fact, depending on which commentary or which book or which scholar you're reading, sometimes you'll turn to Isaiah 40. Some commentaries, in fact, will take you through chapter 1 through 39. The second volume might be chapter 40 through 65 or 40 through 55, because beginning, I don't know when this started, a couple centuries ago, there were scholars of a liberal leaning bent who began to call this section, beginning with chapter 40, as second Isaiah. And they don't mean the second phase of Isaiah's ministry. They mean that the original Isaiah, the one we meet back in chapter 6, well, he wrote the first 39 chapters, and then later you had another guy come along, and he picked up where the real Isaiah dropped off, and he began writing chapter 40 and following, and he's called the second Isaiah. And then there's even some who say, well, yeah, actually, you know what? There was a third guy, beginning with chapter 56, who came along, and he added even more material, and we're going to call him third Isaiah. So 3 Isaiahs. And the reason they hold to this is basically because there is material in chapter 40 and following, which is looking ahead to the Babylonian exile, or, even to Persians. And they'll say, well, there's no way that Isaiah could have known that. There's no way that what
my favorite argument of when people are doing like textual criticism and stuff is when a prophet knows something that he couldn't have possibly known. So therefore you decide, well, we got to date this differently. And you're like, I don't think you know what a prophet is.
Prophet does. Yeah. You're talking about circular reasoning too. Yeah. You're deciding beforehand, well, prophets obviously can't know the future. And therefore, if they speak of something in the future, then it must have been written not in the future, but in that time that's pretending to be the future, but actually is the present for the writer, or the past. Well, yeah.
Well, that's kind of like saying, like, Jesus didn't rise from the dead because people don't rise from the dead. And it's like, well, yeah, especially if you remove the accounts of people rising from the dead. Yeah, I mean, like people don't do it. People don't catch fish if you remove every instance of people catching fish. Now, do they? Like that's that? How? What are you talking about? Like you can't work it like that. Part of the thing that's amazing about the book of Isaiah or any of the prophets is them knowing things that they couldn't have possibly known. That's the whole thing, man.
That's why they're called prophets, right? And how do they know this? Because God told them. It's real simple. This is So the whole reasoning behind this classification of second and third Isaiah is basically a denial of the fact that God actually talks to these people and tells them what is going to happen. And, they were writing not just for their generation, they were writing for a generation which is to come. And even what they spoke to their generation about future events was still comforting to them, because it means that God is the one who is providentially ordering history and is going to rescue his people. And it wasn't as if it was comfortless to them to know what God was going to do in the future, any more than it's like comfortless for us to know that Christ is going to return again. Well, of course, that's of comfort to us. Yeah. So anyway, if you come across any reference to second or third Isaiah, that's what is being talked about. Needless to say, based upon everything Dan and I have said, we do not accept that. We believe that there was a first Isaiah and an only Isaiah, and he wrote all 65 chapters of the book that bears his name. So, that being said, yes, we are entering into a second part of Isaiah's book. And we're leaving behind the historical section, and we're jumping right back into some poetry. And we're going to hear a lot in these coming chapters about God's, basically his universal plan of salvation. There's going to be a focus upon, we've seen that already. It's not like the first part of Isaiah is lacking that, but it's going to become a major theme. That God has a plan, a saving plan, that isn't just for Israel, isn't just for Judah, but it's for all peoples, for the Gentiles as well as the Israelites. And this plan is going to center around the work of his servant. And we're going to see the servant songs that are coming up in Isaiah as well. In fact, very, very soon we'll come into contact with those. And of course, this will reach its high point in Isaiah, the latter part of Isaiah 52, and then in Isaiah 53, where you have the suffering servant. So this is all going to be a manifestation of the glory of God, the saving work of God, which isn't just for Israel, but it is for all the nations. And there's going to be also woven into this the theme of a cosmopolitan exodus, where God is going to bring all people home to himself. There'll be plenty of law and judgment that's woven into this, as you would expect, but that's going to be a major focus of the chapters that are coming up. So we start out here with a passage I think that's probably very familiar to a lot of people. I think this is, if you're in a church that celebrates the liturgical seasons, I think this is an Advent theme that we hear quite a bit. So I'll just read the first two verses to start out here. Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly. In the Hebrew, that is literally speak to the heart, which is commonly what a lover will do to the beloved. So it's what Boaz did to Ruth. It's what God constantly does to Israel. Sometimes it's spoken to those that you just care about, like David to his servants. So speak to the heart, or speak tenderly to Jerusalem, and cry to her. I think that verb kara could also even be translated as proclaim. So cry out in proclamation. Preach, we might say. Cry to her or preach to her. And here's the sermon. That her warfare is ended. Her iniquity is pardoned. That she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. Let me just point out a couple things that is pretty rich here. So first of all, that word for warfare, it's so if you've heard the word Sabaoth, like the Lord God Sabaoth, that's a plural of this word, which is Sava. It can mean like warfare, but it can also just kind of include any kind of fixed period of service or hardship. I think the ESV even has a footnote here which says hardship is another translation of that. So it's the hardship, the servitude, the pain, the warfare, the turmoil, all that stuff connected with the fact that she has sins. She has rebellions. And then one more thing about the Hebrew, and that is this word pardoned. That's a fine translation, but the word itself is connected to like God's pleasure at receiving a sacrifice, like the pleasing aroma. So it's kind of unusual use of the verb, but it's probably something like has been atoned for, or has been it's pardoned because it's been atoned for, because it's been expiated. That's kind of the resonance of this word. So there's been a pardoning of iniquity. Why? Because there's been a sacrifice that was pleasing to God. In fact, a sacrifice that was so great that the sinners receive from the Lord's hand double for all their sins. They don't receive just forgiveness, but it's like a doubling, almost like forgiveness and then righteousness that is given to you as a result of this atoning sacrifice.
Yeah, this might be like where you get the idea of you gain more in Christ than you lost in Adam, right? Where it's like, like twice as much.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a beautiful image here. Comfort. Like with Simeon in the temple, he's waiting for what? For the consolation of Israel. Yeah, he's waiting for that comfort which is to come. It's a doubling. Comfort, my people, says your God, which is a perfect follow-up to what we just talked about. Chapter 39, there's a coming Babylonian exile. And that Babylonian exile, it happens. The people, everything that Hezekiah showed to those envoys from Babylon, that was carried away, and not just the stuff, but the people. So you got this coming exile. There's the broader exile of sin and death, the captivity to the devil, and God just like breaks in on that, and he says, "I'm going to give you comfort. I'm going to give you consolation. I'm going to declare an end to your strife and your warfare and your suffering and your servitude, because, as we'll learn as this goes on, my servant is going to bear your iniquities. He's going to pay the penalty. He's going to give himself as a sacrifice for those, a pleasing sacrifice. And as a result of that, not only am I going to pardon your sins, but I'm going to double my mercy by giving you also my peace and my righteousness and all those things that you could never get on your own." So that's first two verses. Then another very well-known section, because we see this quoted in all four of the Gospels. I'll read 3 through 5. A voice cries. This is our word that could also be translated preach or proclaim. A voice cries, "In the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be lifted up, and every mountain and hill be made low. The uneven ground shall become level, and the rough places a plain. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken." Well, there you go. There's your mission of John the Baptist, right?
Hey, who's going to do this?
I wonder who. Yeah, that's quoted in Matthew 3, Mark 1, Luke 3, John 1. Every single one of them rush to this verse when they're describing the ministry of John the Baptist. Kind of as a interesting, curious side note, this verse was also kind of the theme verse for that Dead Sea community at Qumran. They thought that's why they went out there. So in their own writings, they quote Isaiah 40. They're in the wilderness, and they're getting ready for the Lord. So they move away from society, separate themselves from the temple in Jerusalem, establish a little sect out there in the wilderness, and they thought that they were preparing the way for the Lord by moving out there. But it was another guy, actually pretty close to them, that was doing that work, and that was John the Baptist. And what he's doing is basically making sure there's no obstructions. Is there a valley there? Fill it up. Is there a mountain or a hill there? We'll bulldoze it. We're gonna do what they do today when they make highways, right? We're gonna drill through mountains. We're gonna build everything up. We're gonna make this as level and as smooth as possible. Why? Because God's showing up. So we're preparing a way, the way of the Lord. We're making this highway for our God because he's coming. And we want to make sure that everything is ready for him. He's coming. He's going to reveal his glory, and all flesh shall see it together. So these kind of passages from the Old Testament are, of course, they're helpful in lots of different ways. But one way they're helpful is a way of demonstrating that when you take what the Gospels do with this, where they quote it in reference to John, and then you look at it in its Old Testament context, you see, who's coming? The Lord, our God. The glory of the Lord is coming. Well, you look at in the Gospels, whose way is John preparing? Of course, he's preparing the way for Jesus. Therefore, who is Jesus? Well, he is the Lord, right? He is our God. He's the glory of the Lord revealed. So this is what I think when it becomes so helpful when you're talking about the identity of Jesus and his divinity, to look at the Old Testament background and see how these passages, this happens all over the place, how Old Testament passages, which are in explicit reference to Yahweh, are then applied explicitly to Jesus. So yeah, he is the servant of the Lord, but he also is he's God of God, light of light, true God of true God, Yahweh in the flesh.
Yeah, I mean, and one of the things that John is doing is, I think it's safe to say that at the time of the arrival of Jesus, the way to God. So if you were to try to figure out how would one get to God, that way was anything but like straight and and easy, right? Like where you're like, hey, it's a straight shot, man. Like you just head out, just take this highway, and you're like, it's right there. No, it's like they had made this a very difficult thing, and so you do see. I mean, obviously the religious leaders, the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the chief priests, like John is not really talking to them. He's not really trying to recruit them to be baptized. In fact, whenever they show up, I mean, he's like, "Hey, who warned you?"
Yeah, they get tongue lashing, don't they?
You know.
Right. Yeah. Who told you, you brood of vipers?
Yeah, like I don't got anything for you guys. But that is the leveling, right? That you can see even in the ministry of John. I mean, so Jesus is constantly picking fights with the scribes and the Pharisees and the Sadducees, all this stuff. But it wasn't like John hadn't set that precedent before him. He certainly had.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Jesus, if anything, just picks up that baton from John, right? And to make some metaphors, pokes the bear with it. He's doing the same thing that John did. So what's amazing is not that John got arrested and beheaded when he did. It's that he lasted as long as he did. And what's amazing is not that Jesus got arrested and crucified, but that he made it 3 years before they did this to him.
And the reason is the same. I mean, you get the providence of God, of course. But why didn't these religious leaders take John out? Too many people. Why didn't they take Jesus out sooner? Too many people. Like he had too many people that were saying, this might be the one. And I mean, you read about John, and I don't know. I mean, you don't get the numbers, but it sounds like a lot of people. I mean, it is droves of people going out to the wilderness, and there's one thing the religious leaders like. It's like, well, we like being in the favor of the people, and so, of course, this is all God's providence, but God will even use something like, "I'll just make you too popular to kill."
Yeah. Even after John has been killed. They're still scared of the people's adherence to John, because when Jesus says, I'll answer your question as soon as you tell me whether John was from God or not. And they're like, what are we going to say?
Think probably, this is a total, I know we're like way off here, but hey, this passage has to do with John the Baptist, so maybe not. I think too that because he was killed by the Romans, in the people's minds now, John is like a straight up martyr. And so like they really like, what are you going to do? You going to like sit there and say John wasn't a prophet in front of all the people? Like he's probably been lionized like crazy now. Like it's like, yeah, the oppressive, Roman rulers beheaded a prophet. And so like that, yeah, I don't think there were less people holding John in high esteem after he dies at the hands of Herod.
In fact, I think this is confirmation of just how popular John was among the common people. So fast forward decades, and you have Josephus writing his history. And who does he include in his history? He includes a section about John the Baptist. And this is, I know for people who have looked into this, there's a part of Josephus' testimony where it seems like later Christian scribes who've copied it in the section where he talks about Jesus. They have added some material, but I think also most Josephus scholars would argue that the basic material that's there about Jesus was original with Josephus. And also he wrote about John the Baptist, and he spoke of him positively. Now, this is Josephus, who was a traitor to the Romans. He went over to the Romans, but when he's writing the Jewish history, he's actually talking positively about John. And this is post 70 AD. I mean, this is over 40 years after what happened to John. So I think that was so enmeshed in the memory of the Jewish people of the first century that it's testimony to the fact that John made a lasting impact by means of his, I guess, prophetic popularity back then.
Yeah, and I mean, he was. And this is how this works, man. You can just practically, if you're I don't know, if you're like a singer and you're at like the height of your popularity, then you get to the mountaintop and then you start to go down, and that's how it works. Well, there's some people that die in some plane crash or get assassinated or something like that, and they get taken out at like the height of their popularity. And that they are cemented as legend at that point. And this is what happens to John. I mean, John gets taken out. He says, hey, you must increase, I must decrease, but he doesn't get a lot of like time to decrease.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he got the mountaintop, and that's when they took him out, basically. So in the popular imagination, that's where he stayed, which is, I mean, great to... Another way of saying, as Jesus said, among those born of women, no one has been born who's greater than John the Baptist. Right?
Yeah. Taken out at his height too. Like he didn't have to grow old. None of that. Like I mean, it was like, yeah, he's sort of cemented as that guy.
Yeah, and here we are still talking about him, right?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, like you could think about even like modern people. Like, think about like presidents, right? So. You probably would struggle to list off. We have, every president we've ever had. I would.
There's no way. Yeah. Sometimes someone will name a president, and I'm like, "Are you sure?" That's the president, because he's just so obscure, right?
Yeah, and I can name like the ones in my lifetime, and a little bit before that, and I can name the first, couple, whatever. Yeah. But you could take someone like, here's a president though that I was not alive for, but if you say JFK. Everybody knows who that is. Like, and I don't know. I'm not like as familiar with the presidents before him. Maybe not even as familiar with the presidents after him until they start to impact me in the life, and the presidents that I've been alive under. I wasn't alive for JFK, but why is that? Why does everyone know? I mean, shoot, dude, that's not even his name. That's like. That's just 3 letters.
Just initials, right?
Yeah. But everyone knows who you're talking about. Why? Because he got taken out, like at the height of what he was. And so, yeah, that's all that to say. John, I think, was that bulldozer that was taking out those mountains. He was the one who was filling up the valleys. Like this was his whole job.
Yeah. And suffered as a result of it, but that's what God sent him to do. Okay, so we're through 5 verses. We got about 5 minutes left here, so we can cover a little bit more. Let me read 6 through 8. we have another voice. We got 3 voices here. So a voice, and then we'll have another voice in verse 9. So a voice says, cry. And I said, what shall I cry? Well, here's another sermon. Here's what he is to preach. All flesh is grass, and all its, well, I'll just read the ESV. I'll explain the word behind it in a minute. All its beauty is like the flower of the field. The grass withers, the flower fades. When the breath of the Lord blows on it, that's our word ruach, which could also be translated as spirit. When the breath or spirit of the Lord blows on it. Surely the people are grass. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God will stand forever. So just a couple things about this word that's translated as beauty. The word behind that is actually chesed. So our word for covenant loyalty, steadfast love, loving kindness, all those ways that we try and capture in English chesed. I think what's going on here, though, is probably the element of that word that has to do with loyalty and fidelity. I guess you could translate it as love, too, is being used here. So I don't know why they translate it as beauty. I would translate it something like, all flesh's loyalty or fidelity or love. What's it like? Well, it's like a flower of the field, which the breath of the Lord blows on it, and it is no more. The whole purpose of this section, 6 through 8, is to demonstrate the fact that when you're talking about humanity, flesh, which is metaphorically referred to as grass or flowers here, when you're talking about humanity, everything that we do, everything we say, in comparison to God, well, we're nothing. I mean, this is, of course, a common biblical metaphor. You see it all over the Psalms and other prophetic literature, too, talking about the impermanency of humanity. We're just here today and gone tomorrow. We're like dust, or what's the image I'm looking for? The chaff that the wind blows away. So here are the images of a grass or flower. So if that's who we are, then what does stick around? Well, that's the way he ends this. He says, the word of our God will stand forever. By the way, if you ever come across, we were talking about JFK earlier, you ever come across these initials, VDMA, that's where this comes from. So that is, the VDMA comes from verbum, this is the Latin phrase, verbum domini manet in aeternum, which means the word of the Lord endures forever. So that's actually, it's taken from 1 Peter 1:25, but 1 Peter 1:25 is quoting this verse from Isaiah. So it became kind of a Reformation slogan, VDMA, the word of the Lord endures forever. And that's where they get that from. And of course, it's a fitting way of kind of summing up what the message of the church is. People come and go, people's promises come and go, people's fidelity is fickle. But if you want something that is going to last forever, remain steadfast, something you can always, always trust, then it's the word of our God.
And isn't it kind of interesting that you have a passage here that is, of course, talking about John the Baptist, who is sort of the last, like the final prophet before, you have like the prophet in Jesus. So he's like the last capital P speaking the word of the Lord prophet, greatest man who ever lived, according to Jesus. And he's a flesh and blood man. And of course he will die. But his words won't, because they're the words of the Lord, right? And so we were just talking about some of his words. He's out there crying in the wilderness to make straight the paths of God. Well, those have endured all this time later, even though, of course, as we just discussed, he did not.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, his word remains, his preaching remains. We hear it. Well, it's in the scriptures. We hear it preached all the time, still from pulpits today. Yeah, so he's flesh and blood. He passed. He's with our Lord, but his words remain resounding still today.
Yeah, because they're God's words.
Because they're God's words, yes.
Yep.
All right, well, we're at our 40-minute mark.
That's a good place to end.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Well, we'll pick it up with verse 9 next time. I'll see you then, Chad.
See you then.